My parents installed cameras in every room for security, until I found out where the footage was really going. The FBI agent slid the photograph across the table, and I felt my breakfast rise into my throat. It was me, 17 years old, stepping out of the shower in my own bathroom, completely unaware that anyone was watching. The timestamp in the corner read 3 years ago. The watermark in the bottom left corner was a website URL I'd never seen before, something with random numbers and letters that looked like it belonged on the dark web. Agent Denise Kowalski watched my face carefully as I processed what I was seeing, her pen hovering over a yellow legal pad. "There are 412 images of you on this server," she said, her voice clinical but not unkind. "Videos too, dating back to when you were 14. I couldn't speak. My hands were shaking so violently that I had to press them flat against the cold metal table just to keep them still. 14. I was 14 when my parents installed those cameras. They told me it was because of the break-ins happening in our neighborhood. They told me it was for our protection. They told me I had nothing to worry about. I'd been living what I thought was a completely normal life for 21 years when everything collapsed. My name doesn't matter for this story, but what happened to me might matter to someone else going through something similar, so I'm going to tell you everything. I grew up in a split-level house in suburban Ohio, the kind of neighborhood where people waved at each other while mowing their lawns and organized block parties every 4th of July. My father, Raymond Pierce, worked as an IT consultant for a mid-sized firm downtown. My mother, Diane Pierce, was a dental hygienist at a family practice 3 miles from our house. They were respected. They went to church on Sundays. They brought casseroles to sick neighbors and volunteered at the food bank during Thanksgiving. I was their only child, and by all outward appearances, I was loved. I had everything I needed growing up, never went hungry, got help with my homework, had parents who showed up to my baseball games and school plays. I thought we were close. I thought I knew them. The cameras went up the summer before my freshman year of high school. There had been a string of burglaries in our area, 3 houses hit within 2 weeks, and my father decided we needed a comprehensive security system. I remember him explaining it to me at the dinner table, pulling up diagrams on his laptop showing where each camera would be positioned. Living room, kitchen, front porch, back porch, garage, hallway, basement stairs. I nodded along, not really paying attention because I was 15 and had better things to think about than home security. What I didn't know then was that the diagram he showed me was incomplete. He'd left off the cameras in my bedroom and bathroom, the ones hidden so carefully that I wouldn't find them for another 6 years. The ones that would eventually destroy our family and send both of my parents to federal prison. I left for college at 18, attending Ohio State on a partial academic scholarship. Those 4 years were the freest I'd ever felt, living in dorms and then apartments with roommates, coming home only for holidays and occasional weekends. My parents kept the house exactly the same, my childhood bedroom preserved like a time capsule, and whenever I visited, I fell back into old routines without thinking twice. Sleeping in my old bed, showering in my old bathroom, changing clothes with the door closed but never locked, because why would I lock a door in my parents' house? I had no idea that every moment of privacy I thought I had was an illusion. After graduation, I moved back home temporarily while job hunting, planning to stay 3 or 4 months at most, until I found an apartment in Columbus. That decision to move back home is the only reason I ever discovered the truth. If I'd gone straight to my own place, I might never have known. Sometimes I think about that alternate timeline, the version of me who remains blissfully ignorant, and I don't know whether to envy him or pity him. The first red flag appeared on a Thursday evening in late September, about 6 weeks after I'd moved back in. I was in the basement using my father's old desktop computer because my laptop was updating, and I needed to check my email for a job interview confirmation. The computer was ancient and slow, taking forever to load even basic web pages, so I started poking around the file system out of boredom while I waited. That's when I found a folder labeled backup_sys, buried 3 levels deep in the documents directory. It wasn't password protected, which surprised me given my father's IT background, and when I clicked on it, I found thousands of video files organized by date. At first, I assumed they were the security camera recordings, mundane footage of our empty living room, and the occasional delivery driver at the front door. But the file names didn't match the camera positions I knew about. There were designations I didn't recognize: BR1, BR2, BATH1, BATH2. I told myself they must be old files from a previous system, something from before the current cameras. I almost closed the folder and forgot about it entirely. But something made me click on one of the files, a video dated from 2 weeks earlier, labeled BR1_0911124_2247. The video opened in a media player, and for several seconds I couldn't understand what I was looking at. The angle was strange, positioned high in a corner looking down, and the lighting was dim. Then I recognized the furniture, the dresser with the baseball trophy on top, the poster of the Cleveland Guardians above the bed, the blue comforter I'd slept under since I was 12 years old. I was looking at my own bedroom from a camera I never knew existed. The timestamp showed 10:47 p.m., and the video showed me sitting on my bed scrolling through my phone in my boxers before eventually lying down to sleep. My whole body went cold. I clicked on another file at random, this one from the BATH1 folder, and immediately wished I hadn't. It was exactly what I feared. Me, in the shower, completely exposed. My hands started shaking so badly that I accidentally knocked the mouse off the desk. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears, could feel sweat breaking out across my forehead despite the basement being cool. There had to be an explanation. My father was paranoid about security, that was all. Maybe he'd installed extra cameras without telling me because he was worried about break-ins even in the private areas of the house. It was invasive and wrong, but it could be explained as misguided overprotection. That's what I told myself as I sat there hyperventilating in front of the screen. But I couldn't stop looking. I had to know how far this went. I started checking the dates on the files, scrolling back through the folder's contents with trembling fingers. The oldest videos were from 7 years ago. 7 years. I would have been 14 when these recordings started. A sick feeling spread through my stomach as I realized the implications. This wasn't recent paranoia. This had been happening since the cameras were first installed, hidden in my most private spaces from the very beginning. I found folders for every year, thousands of files documenting moments I thought belonged only to me. Getting dressed for school, studying at my desk in my pajamas, every shower, every moment of vulnerability, captured and saved. Why would my father keep all of this? What possible reason could justify recording your own child in their bathroom for 7 years? The answer that suggested itself was so horrifying that my mind refused to accept it. I closed all the folders and sat in the dark basement for almost an hour, trying to convince myself that I was overreacting, that there was some innocent explanation I hadn't considered. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my bed, the same bed I now knew was being filmed, and stared at the ceiling trying to figure out where the camera was hidden. I couldn't see anything obvious, no small holes in the walls or suspicious objects on shelves, which meant my father had concealed them professionally. Of course he had. He worked in IT. He knew exactly what he was doing. By morning, I had decided to confront him directly. Maybe he would have an explanation that made sense. Maybe I was misinterpreting something. I wanted so badly for there to be a reasonable answer that I was willing to walk up to my father and ask him why he'd been secretly filming me in my bathroom since I was 14. But when I came downstairs and saw him sitting at the kitchen table reading the news on his tablet, looking exactly like the normal, boring, suburban dad he'd always appeared to be, I couldn't do it. The words died in my throat. I made coffee and small talk about the weather and went back to my room feeling like a coward. Instead of confronting him, I decided to investigate further. If the videos were just sitting on his computer, maybe there was more information somewhere that would help me understand what was happening. I waited until both of my parents left for work the following Monday, then went back down to the basement with a USB drive and a growing sense of dread. This time I looked more carefully at the folder structure, examining the metadata and searching for any clues about why these videos existed. That's when I found the second folder, the one that changed everything. It was hidden inside a system directory, requiring administrator access to view, and it was labeled with a string of random characters that meant nothing to me. Inside were logs, hundreds of them, detailed records of file transfers, uploads to external servers, payment confirmations. My father wasn't just recording me, he was selling the footage. The logs showed regular uploads to multiple platforms, with corresponding deposits into a cryptocurrency wallet. The amounts varied, $50 here, $200 there, occasionally larger sums for what the logs described as premium content. My vision went blurry. Premium content. That's what my childhood was worth. That's what my privacy had been converted into. I copied everything I could find onto the USB drive, my hands shaking so badly that I kept missing the port. I took screenshots of the logs, the payment records, the folder structure. I didn't know what I was going to do with any of it, but I knew I needed evidence. When I heard the garage door open, my mother coming home early from work, I nearly had a heart attack. I yanked out the USB drive, closed all the windows, and practically ran upstairs to my room, where I sat on my bed trying to control my breathing while my mother called up to ask if I wanted her to make lunch. I said no. I said I wasn't feeling well. That was the first honest thing I'd said to either of my parents in days, because I had never felt more sick in my entire life. I spent the rest of that afternoon in a state of paralyzed disbelief, unable to process what I'd discovered. My father, the man who taught me to ride a bike and helped me with calculus homework, had been exploiting me for profit since before I was old enough to drive. And my mother lived in this house. She had to know. There was no way she didn't know. The next 3 days were a special kind of torture. I went through the motions of normal family life while my mind screamed at me to run, to call the police, to burn the whole house down. Every meal with my parents felt like sitting across from strangers. Every conversation was an exercise in suppressing the accusations that wanted to claw their way out of my throat. I kept catching my father looking at me, probably just normal parental glances, but now every look felt predatory. I started showering at the gym and changing clothes in my car. I couldn't stand to be in those rooms anymore, knowing that somewhere behind the walls, a camera was watching. I wasn't sleeping more than 2 or 3 hours a night, and when I did sleep, I had nightmares about eyes in the walls, about being displayed on giant screens in front of laughing strangers. I knew I needed help. I couldn't handle this alone. But who do you call when your own parents are the monsters? I didn't have siblings to confide in. My closest friends from college were scattered across the country. I felt completely and utterly isolated. On the 4th day, I called my best friend from high school, a guy named Oliver Brennan who had gone to law school and was now working at a firm in Cleveland. I didn't tell him everything over the phone, just that I'd discovered something disturbing and needed legal advice. He could hear the panic in my voice and agreed to meet me that same evening at a coffee shop halfway between us. When I sat down across from him and handed him my phone with the screenshots pulled up, I watched his expression shift from confused curiosity to absolute horror. "This is your parents' house?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. "And this is you in these files?" I nodded again. Oliver set down the phone and rubbed his face with both hands, the way he used to do in college when he was stressed about exams. "This is federal," he said finally. "This is production and distribution of child sexual abuse material. Your parents could be looking at decades in prison." Hearing it laid out in those terms, in legal language from someone I trusted, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. I had known, intellectually, what my father was doing. But hearing it called what it was, child sexual abuse material, made me double over in my seat like I'd been punched. Oliver connected me with a criminal attorney named Patricia Lawson, a former federal prosecutor who now worked in private practice. I met with her 2 days later at her office, a sleek high-rise in downtown Cleveland that felt like a different universe from my parents' split level in the suburbs. She reviewed everything I'd brought, asking clarifying questions in a calm, professional tone that somehow made the whole situation feel slightly more manageable. "The evidence you've gathered is compelling," she said, "but we need to be careful about how we proceed. If we go to the authorities now, your parents will be arrested. But there's a risk that others involved, buyers, platform operators, could be tipped off and disappear. The FBI may want to conduct a broader investigation before making arrests." The FBI. I hadn't even thought about that level of involvement. Patricia explained that cases involving the distribution of exploitative material often involved multiple perpetrators across state and international lines, which automatically made it a federal matter. She offered to reach out to contacts at the Bureau on my behalf, initiating the process while protecting my identity as a victim. I agreed. I didn't know what else to do. The following week was the longest of my life. I continued living in my parents' house because Patricia and the FBI agent she connected me with, Agent Denise Kowalski, both advised against any sudden changes in behavior that might alert my father. "Act normal," they said. "Don't let them know you know anything." So I sat at the dinner table and passed the salt when asked and answered questions about my job search and pretended that my entire world hadn't collapsed into a nightmare. My mother talked about a difficult patient at the dental office. My father complained about a software bug at work. I nodded and smiled and felt like I was losing my mind. Agent Kowalski met with me 3 times during that period, always at locations far from my neighborhood, showing me evidence that her team had gathered through their own investigation. They'd identified the platforms where my father uploaded content. They'd traced cryptocurrency payments across multiple wallets. They'd found that he wasn't the only seller. He was part of a network of at least 15 individuals across the country producing and distributing similar material. My case, as horrifying as it was to me personally, was just one thread in a much larger web of exploitation. 2 weeks after my initial meeting with Patricia Lawson, Agent Kowalski told me it was time to move out. The FBI was preparing to make arrests across multiple states simultaneously, and they needed me safely away from the house before that happened. I told my parents I'd gotten a job offer in Columbus, which was technically true. I'd accepted a position 2 days earlier specifically so I'd have an excuse to leave, and needed to relocate immediately for training. My father actually helped me load boxes into my car. He clapped me on the shoulder and told me he was proud of me. Standing there in the driveway, accepting his congratulations while knowing that federal agents would be at our door within 48 hours, was the most surreal moment of my life. My mother hugged me and told me to call every Sunday. I said I would. I got in my car and drove away from my childhood home for what I knew would be the last time, watching it shrink in my rearview mirror until I turned the corner and it disappeared from sight completely. The arrests happened on a Thursday morning at 6 a.m. I know this because Agent Kowalski texted me the moment it was done. Both of my parents were taken into custody without incident. My father had been on his way to the kitchen to make coffee when they knocked. My mother had still been in bed. A search of the house turned up 4 hidden cameras in my bedroom and bathroom, plus 6 more throughout the rest of the house. There were additional storage devices containing material going back even further than I'd discovered, recordings from when I was as young as 11, before the official security system was even installed. I learned later that my father had been doing this even longer than I'd known, using earlier, cruder methods before upgrading to the more sophisticated hidden cameras. The evidence was overwhelming. Computer forensics recovered detailed logs of every upload, every payment, every communication with buyers and fellow distributors. My father's cryptocurrency wallet contained the equivalent of over $200,000, accumulated over nearly a decade of selling images and videos of his own son. The initial hearing was held 3 weeks after the arrests. I didn't attend. Patricia advised against it, saying my presence would only feed media attention and make the experience more traumatic. But I followed the coverage obsessively from my new apartment in Columbus. Both of my parents were denied bail due to the severity of the charges and flight risk assessments. My father was charged with production, distribution, and possession of child sexual abuse material, as well as wire fraud and money laundering. The counts added up to a potential maximum sentence of over 150 years. My mother was charged as an accessory, with prosecutors arguing that she had known about and facilitated the abuse by helping maintain the household where it occurred. She claimed ignorance, said she had no idea what her husband was doing, but text messages recovered from her phone told a different story. Messages where my father discussed upload schedules and payments. Messages where she reminded him to replace a camera battery. Messages where she suggested he capture certain moments when I was home visiting from college. She wasn't just complicit, she was a participant. The trial took place 8 months later in federal court. I testified for almost 4 hours across 2 days, facing a jury of 12 strangers, as I explained in clinical detail how my own parents had exploited me throughout my entire adolescence. The defense attorney tried to paint my father as a troubled man struggling with addiction, someone who needed treatment rather than punishment. He tried to suggest that I had exaggerated my emotional distress for sympathy. At one point, he asked me if I had ever walked around the house naked or in minimal clothing, implying that I had somehow invited the surveillance. I looked him directly in the eyes and said, I was a child in my own home. I had a reasonable expectation of privacy in my own bathroom. Nothing I did invited or justified my father selling videos of me to predators on the internet. The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours, guilty on all counts for both defendants. My father received 63 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. My mother received 18 years as an accessory. Neither of them looked at me as they were led away in handcuffs. I sat in the gallery and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no relief, just a vast emptiness where my family used to be. The months following the conviction were harder than I expected. I had thought that justice would bring closure, that seeing my parents punished would somehow repair the damage they'd done. But trauma doesn't work that way. I started having panic attacks in public spaces, convinced that someone was watching me through hidden cameras. I couldn't sleep in any room with a smoke detector on the ceiling because the shape reminded me of the cameras my father had installed. I developed what my therapist, Dr. Linda Nakamura, diagnosed as complex PTSD, the kind that results not from a single traumatic event, but from prolonged exposure to harmful conditions. You spent years in an environment where you were being violated without your knowledge, she explained during our 5th session. Your brain is still processing the betrayal, still trying to reconcile the parents you thought you had with the people they actually were. She recommended EMDR therapy, which involves processing traumatic memories through guided eye movements. It sounded like pseudoscience to me at first, but I was desperate enough to try anything. 3 months in, I started sleeping through the night for the first time since the discovery. The FBI's broader investigation eventually resulted in the arrests of 31 individuals across 12 states and 3 countries. My father had been a significant node in the network, responsible for introducing at least 5 other perpetrators to the distribution platforms. Some of the people arrested were names I recognized from his social circle: a former co-worker, a neighbor from 2 streets over, a man I'd met at a church picnic when I was 16. The scope of it was staggering. All of these people, living normal-seeming lives, hiding monstrous secrets behind suburban facades. Agent Kowalski called me personally when the final arrests were made, telling me that my willingness to come forward had been instrumental in taking down the entire network. A lot of victims never tell anyone, she said. The shame keeps them silent. But you trusted the process, and because of that, we were able to protect other children who would have been victimized by these people. I thanked her and hung up and cried for an hour, overwhelmed by a complicated mix of gratitude and grief and residual rage that had nowhere left to go. It's been a year and 3 months since my parents were sentenced. I'm writing this from the same apartment in Columbus where I watched the trial coverage, though it feels less like a hiding place now and more like a home. I still go to therapy twice a month. I still have bad days when the weight of what happened feels crushing and inescapable. But I also have good days now. Days when I can go hours without thinking about cameras or surveillance or the parents who treated me like a product. I've built new connections, formed a found family of friends who know my story and love me anyway. I'm dating someone for the first time since everything happened, a woman named Grace who has been patient with my triggers and supportive of my healing process. I don't know if I'll ever fully recover from what my parents did to me. Dr. Nakamura says that recovery isn't about returning to who you were before, because that person no longer exists. It's about building a new version of yourself that can carry the weight of what happened while still moving forward into the future. I've debated whether to share this story publicly for months. Part of me wanted to protect my privacy, to keep the most painful details of my life away from the scrutiny of strangers. But I kept thinking about what Agent Kowalski said, about how many victims stay silent because of shame. I was one of those silent victims for years, not because I knew what was happening, but because my parents had created an environment where I never thought to question my safety. If my story helps even one person recognize the signs of hidden abuse, or gives someone the courage to investigate something that feels wrong in their own home, then the discomfort of sharing it publicly will be worth it. Trust your instincts. If something feels off, investigate. The people closest to you are not always who they appear to be, and the privacy you assume you have might be an illusion maintained by those who wish you harm. My father will die in prison. My mother will be in her 70s when she's released, if she survives that long. I don't visit them. I don't write to them. I don't accept their letters, which arrive occasionally, filled with apologies and explanations that I have no interest in reading. They made their choices, and those choices destroyed any relationship we might have had. I used to wonder what I would say to them if I ever saw them again. What words could possibly express the depth of my betrayal and anger? Now I realize that there's nothing to say. Nothing they could tell me would change what happened. Nothing I could tell them would make them understand the damage they caused. Some wounds don't heal through conversation. Some ruptures can't be repaired. The only thing left is to walk away and build a life that isn't defined by their cruelty. That's what I'm trying to do. Some days I succeed, some days I fail. But I keep trying, because the alternative is letting them win, and they've already taken enough from me. If you made it this far, hit like. You've earned it.